Hello and welcome. In this video we will take a first look at the Avastar animation system. We will create a simple static pose, then we will export our work to an animation file, and finally import and test our pose in Second Life. Okay, let me start by creating a new Avastar from a ready-made template character. Navigate to File, Open Template. Normally you will now proceed by selecting the animation template from here. But then I would have to explain too many concepts at once. However, I want to keep this video as simple as possible. So let's take the textured template for now, and then develop our new animation skills from ground up. From now on we will work only on the armature, and we will work in pose mode all the time. So, what are those green circles which are displayed around the character? These shapes are the animation bones. You can select these bones with the right mouse button, and you can move or rotate them to put the character into the desired pose. But let me show you a few handy options before we go into the details of posing. So, some people dislike the shape of the animation bones, and they prefer to use stick bones instead. Therefore, we have added a quick step to configure the bone display. In the tool shelf, just disable the Shapes option and enable the X-ray option. And if you prefer to work with sticks, then you can also change the armature display type. However, my personal preference is to work with shapes. It is also of benefit when you work mostly in an orthogonal view, namely in front view or inside view. So what next? Let's select the left wrist by using the right mouse button. Then use the keyboard shortcut G to grab the wrist, and move it down into a more relaxed pose. Now this worked, but something has gone wrong with the shoulder. Let's take a closer look here. By the way, one little trick is to select a bone that is close to the place of interest. Then hit the dot on the number pad to focus on this part. Then it becomes much easier to inspect this area. So, we see that our pose has distorted the shoulder a bit. Let's expose the mesh topology to see better what goes on. Select the mesh. Then in the mesh data properties locate the display panel. And there, enable the options wire, and draw all edges. And switch back to the bones. Now we can see much better what happens. We can fix this by rotating the collarbone and the shoulder bone a bit. But we also have another option, that is, we can avoid that this issue shows up at all, by limiting the influence of the wrist bone on its parent bones. Let's select all bones by hitting the key A twice. Then clear all bone transformations. So that we are back in T-pose, and then select the wrist again. Let's enable X-ray mode for a moment. Now you see a dotted orange line which starts at the wrist, and ends near the collarbone. Actually the line ends precisely at the head of the collarbone. We can see that when we disable the bone shapes. So, this line indicates how far the movements of the wrist influences its parent bones. Now move the wrist again, and see what happens when we move it around. We see that we do not want the wrist to also influence the collarbone. And we can change that as follows. Open the Properties sidebar. Locate the Rig Properties panel. In the Rig Properties panel you find a section for targetless IK. Here you see that the chain end is currently at the collarbone. Click on the less button, and you see the chain has been shortened, and it now ends at the shoulder. Now move the wrist again. And you see the collar no longer moves. Which is actually what we want to achieve here. And now the shoulder part looks much better than before. So, after we have fixed the shoulder, let's now take care of the hand pose. We can go ahead and move or rotate the hand until it is in a perfect position. And we can definitely get away with our current knowledge. But we have some more tools, which can help us to get our goal done much faster. One of these helpers is the Manipulator tool. You find this tool in the footer of the viewport. Let me set the Manipulator into rotation mode, and then switch from global to normal rotation. Now you can grab the Manipulator circles to rotate the bones along their local axes. This makes it rather easy to get our hand into the right pose. And here is one more trick. Let's say we wanted the hands to pose with the palms pointing upwards. So let's grab the green Manipulator circle and rotate the wrist along the bone's long axis. However, you see that at a certain angle the hand does no longer rotate, but tries to slip away sideways. This is because of rotation constraints which help to avoid that your character ends up in a crazy pose. Normally you want these constraints to keep intact, but you can disable the constraints on purpose. This can also be done in the Properties sidebar. Here you find the Rotation Controls section. Take care that the wrist bone is selected. Then click on Disable Rotation Limits. And now you can rotate the wrist as much as you like. But well, there is also an apparent pitfall with this method. So we better keep the rotation limits enabled. And use our knowledge about anatomy to get this situation fixed in a better way. Okay, so let's get to another issue, that is, can we mirror copy our work from one side to the other side? The answer is, yes, we can do this by using the pose copy buffer, and later we can mirror paste the pose from the buffer to the other side of the character. Let me show you how this works. Let's select our wrist. Then we copy the wrist bone pose to the pose bone buffer. You find the buffer in the footer of the viewport. So let's click on it. Then, two icons to the right, you see the mirror paste tool. Click on this as well. So what you see is, only the pose of the wrist has been mirror copied. And what you actually have to do is, first, select all 4 bones which are involved in the arm pose. You may want to disable the Manipulator to better see what you do. Then click on the copy buffer. And finally click again on the mirror paste tool. And now you get your pose mirrored to the right arm, just as expected. Well, by now we have learned a couple of tricks for creating poses with Blender. However, we still need to get this pose exported. That is, we have to tell Blender which of the bones in our character actually contribute to our animation. Basically we have to create something similar to a snapshot of our bone configuration, and in animation terminology this is, adding keyframes into a time frame. So, in our pose we have only one time frame, hence we need to add keyframes only for this time frame, and then we are done. I will show you in a moment how you do this manually. But before I do this, let's create another screen area. And then open the Dope Sheet editor. This editor allows us to display and edit all our keyframes. First ensure that the timeline marker is located on time frame 1. then select all bones for which you want to add keyframes. In our case, we want to select all of the bones from the upper limbs. And finally, press I on the keyboard. This will open a pop-up menu, from where you want to select the lock rot entry, which tells Blender that you want to record only the rotation and location data of the selected bones. And this is it. When we now look at the dope sheet editor, then we find 8 keyframes, one for each of the 8 selected bones, and that is exactly what we expect. However, let me show you one last trick, which will save you a lot of headaches. Let's revert to the moment before we created the keyframes. Now take another look into the timeline. There, you also find a small red button. This is the button for automatic keyframe insertion. When you enable this button, and whenever a bone is moved or rotated, then the bone data is automatically added to the related keyframe. And here is how it works. After you enabled the automatic keyframe mode, select both wrist bones. Then press the G key on the keyboard to initiate a bone move, but instantly step out again by clicking on the left mouse button. Now Blender will automatically calculate all affected bones, and we see in the dope sheet that the keyframes for the limb bones are again stored exactly as expected. And whenever you change a bone pose later, the corresponding keyframe is updated instantly, so you never again can forget to insert keyframes. Well, but can you explain why we see only 7 keyframes here? And not 8 as we had before when we added the bones manually? I keep this question to be solved by yourself, and I am confident that you will find the solution quickly. We are now ready to export the animation. The animation exporter is in the Render Properties section. In the Animation Export panel at the bottom. The animation exporter is already preset with reasonable values, however you will need to change 2 entries. First, our animation has only one time frame, hence the end time frame has to be set to 1. Then we want to create a static pose. And we do this by infinitely looping over our single frame, hence we have to enable the option, Loop Animation. Now, all we have to do is to click on Export Animation, select a file name, and export to this file. Later, when you are in Second Life, then all you need to do is to upload the animation. All the rest is set and done. We are now at the end of this video, and we have only scratched the surface of animation. We will get back to this topic in the tutorial about creating basic animations. Until then, have a nice day.